All right, OntraFam, it's time for another Freebie Friday. It's Ken Colwood here from ClickFix.io, and today we're coming at you with something interesting for those who want to streamline their form solutions. And most people can relate to having been on a forum where they have a lot of options to choose from, which isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do when you're on a phone especially. But even on the desktop, if you get into lists that are very long, so for example, this is a list of Marvel movies, right? So, there are 23, I believe, movies on here. So if I'm having to scroll and having to kind of look through things, it makes it take some time. And we all know that time is a killer for conversions. So what we've done is we've come up with a way to create a searchable drop-down list from any text field. So you can see here that, let's say that, I'm more into Spider-Man than any of these other things, right? So if I start typing on Spider-Man, and boom, all of a sudden we have the two movies from this list that have Spider-Man in the title. And then I can just go ahead and click on that and I'm done, right? It went from scrolling through, trying to read every single title, especially if you see in the beginning, they're not in alphabetical order for whatever reason. And I got these lists from, this copypastelist.com, which is an awesome resource for anybody who needs to get some of the most popular lists out there, by the way. But yeah, I got that list from that site, but for whatever reason, these aren't in alphabetical order, and so it would be very difficult. You can imagine if I had 100 of these movies on here, it'd be very difficult for somebody to go through and make any sense of it, and they'd probably just give up and go away. So the obvious thing to do would be to go ahead and sort that list before you made it an option. And for a normal drop-down Ontraport field, you would just go ahead and make a custom field, and it would have all the 25 or 100 or 1,000 options that you want to put on there. If you take the time to order it alphabetically, just like they do with the state list, well, then it's somewhat usable, right? But it still becomes a little bit unwieldy once you get over a certain number. So that's kind of a funny example of how we would use this, right? But a real world example is what we had to do for a fintech client who needed to have a list of all the banks in the US. And you can see here by the options that there are a ton of these banks, right? And where did I get this list of banks? Well, I just searched online for all the banks in America, and I came up with this page here, right? And you can see that there are pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of banks. And so what I did is I went ahead and I copied all of those banks into just a big list. So I just kind of selected it all, right? And you can see even how long it takes me to get all the banks on here, right? All right, so I'm all the way up to A. All right, so I got those. I went over to a little tool called Text Mechanic. I pasted it in up here, and I said, okay, get rid of all the line breaks and replace it with a comma, which is the format that we actually need to use for this shortcode to work. All right, and so I have this big long list of banks. And you can imagine how long it would take you if you tried to use a regular drop-down field to go ahead and put together this list of options for somebody to go through. And even if you did take the time to do that, it would be almost unusable for an actual person to go ahead and scroll all the way through that list until they found their bank, right? So enter our solution with the searchable dropdown. All right, so now let's say, I don't know what banks start with Z. Let's see, there's ZI. Well, look, Zion's Bank Corporation, right? If I wanted to select Zion's Bank Corporation, I just click on it and I'm done. I can hit submit and that's it, right? Otherwise, I would have to, on a normal dropdown, I have to scroll until I get down to Z. And again, it's time. It's all about time. How long something takes somebody to complete is going to directly impact the odds or the probability of them completing it, right? So let's take a quick look at how easy this was to set up. So just have a normal form here, all the basic normal fields that you would have. And then I went ahead and I just used an existing form, but you would probably create a custom field for this. And I went ahead and just called it favorite Marvel movie. Now, in this case, there are two ways to deploy what we call the autocomplete shortcode. The first way is to do it all in the custom code section. So I come into custom code and I go ahead and I write out autocomplete and then I target that specific field and I say the options equal. Then I put double quotes and I do a comma separated list of all, in this case, all the movies that I wanted to be on the list. And you can see that this takes up a lot of space. But once that's done, you're all good. Now, the reason I use double quotes, technically we support double or single quotes, but if you have any apostrophes in here, like I believe Marvel's The Avenger, for example, that breaks it, right? So we use double quotes on the outside to frame the shortcode, and then any apostrophes or single quotes that are in the list will still work, right? So that's the list of the 23 Marvel movies, right? Now, that's it. If you have a shorter type list and you want to just go ahead and throw it into the custom field, or the custom code, I should say, sorry, then it'll work just fine. And you see on the front end that we do, in fact, come up with a list that we've defined that we can also search. Now, if you have a longer list like we do with the banks, it's probably simpler for most people instead of having to put it into the custom code, where you would see that in order to edit that, it'd be a little bit difficult, to say the least, as far as this list extending almost into infinity. So we have another way to do it, where you can take, you can target any field. In this case, we're targeting the field that we called banks. We're targeting this field, and we define the options as all of the options that are listed in this long text box, right? You could use a note field, you could use any kind of long text box. And all we did on the back end is we said, okay, these are where we're going to define the options. And all we need to do is click on advanced and pre-fill this field's value with all the options we want to use. And then on the front end, we now have that searchable list of all of the banks in America. Now, obviously, if this were a production page, we would just go ahead and use another shortcode to hide this field. And somebody that was on this page would just see the banks. They would click on that. They would search for their bank, and they would select their bank and click submit, and you're done. Right? So you can imagine that there are a myriad of different ways to use this. Like I said, this is a real world case study of what we did because the client had literally 500 or so banks that they needed to list out, and it was very important for their onboarding process for the client, for their end user, to go ahead and select that financial institution so that they would know how to proceed from there. So that's it, short and sweet today. If you have any questions about how to make this work, or any ideas on a good use case for something like this, please let us know in the comments below. And as always, I look forward to the next time we can explore a little bit of how clickfix.io can help you and get the most out of your Ontraport account.